Good evening. This is Mark Myhofer, the man accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting a 7-year-old girl in St. Paul. But tonight we are learning that's not even his legal name.
We're also learning that Myhofer has a history that should have landed him on the sex offender registry, but didn't. As investigative reporter AJ Legault shows us, now the community is taking action.
Do you guys have enough?
Cathedral Hill is a neighborhood on call.
Call to action.
Today's action, neighbors alerting neighbors.
We are just flyering the neighborhood, trying to get some community awareness. There was an assault on a child in the neighborhood last week.
A crime Maya Honeywell finds hard to even talk about.
And I can't imagine having a kid go through what happened there. It's tough.
The toughest pill.
The community knew that that person had been around.
Absolutely. And
Preschool director Whitney Blessing knew.
when he came to the door of the school and he tried the doorknob.
It was the first of many run-ins with a man whose bizarre behavior forced children inside off the playground.
Just a little too close and a little too curious.
And the school onto alert.
I did call the police.
The incident report shows Mark Myhofer was in the park, on his knees as if praying, watching children. No arrest. Creepiness is not a crime, Whitney was told. What's not clear from the report is if even police knew about the history of the man they were dealing with.
I wish the dots had been connected sooner.
The biggest dot, a 2011 arrest after Myhofer tried luring children into his vehicle in this Anoka park. Court records show he asked a young girl to have sex with him for $10,000. He told investigators, God wrote about me in a book and said I could do whatever I want, that God had given him permission to solicit children for sex. His trial proved beyond all reasonable doubt he committed the offense, but he was found not guilty by reason of mental illness. No prison, no sex offender registry. He spent time at St. Peter's Mental Hospital. His civil commitment shows he was found likely to attempt to physically harm self or others unless involuntary commitment is continued. He was released, began living at Catholic Charities in St. Paul, and court records show he was even allowed to legally change his name from Mark Myhofer to August James Rutherford, because he technically has no felonies on his record.
It's appalling to me that this was allowed to happen.
When the little girl disappeared,
The father approached us directly. Have you seen my little girl?
it didn't take police long to zero in on Myhofer. Neighbors point to missed warnings and legal loopholes.
That somebody had to be a victim while we waited. That's the hard part.
Police booked and charged the suspect as Mark Myhofer, but as we showed you, that's no longer even his legal name. The community is holding their call to action meeting Thursday night at 6:30 at St. Paul College. Police and city leaders are expected to be in attendance. Julie.
Just heartbreaking. Thank you, AJ. Well, tonight, KARE 11 investigates the history of the man accused in a vicious attack on a child. St. Paul police say Mark Myhofer kidnapped and sexually assaulted a young girl in the Cathedral Hill neighborhood. Police recordings obtained by KARE 11 show Myhofer had previously admitted to being a pedophile. Investigative reporter AJ Legault has our continuing coverage.
Nearly 5 years before a 7-year-old girl was kidnapped in Cathedral Hill, pulled into a Catholic Charities apartment, forcibly drugged, duct taped, and sexually assaulted, the suspect in the case, Mark Myhofer, made a damning confession to a police officer.
Apparently you think about having sex with children?
True.
That true statement was made in 2011. Fast forward to 2015.
There was one instance where I did call the police.
Preschool director Whitney Blessing says Myhofer, as seen in this photo snapped by a concerned neighbor, had been lurking around her Cathedral Hill preschool,
And setting off alarms.
approaching children in a nearby park.
He was always just a little too close and a little too curious.
The police report shows they spoke with Myhofer, who said he didn't mean to upset anyone. The report ends with a note: Myhofer had no BCA criminal history.
The impression I was left with when the officer did follow up with me was that he was not a threat.
And that exposes a gaping crack in Minnesota's legal and mental health system, because the truth is Myhofer had a criminal history and it involved attempted sex crimes against children.
I'll be honest and open with you. Yeah, I offered her $10,000 cash to have sex. I asked her nicely, would you be interested in having sex with me for $10,000 in cash?
This recording was taken when Myhofer was arrested at a Fridley, Minnesota park. He'd tried to lure 2 young boys and a 13-year-old girl into his car.
I'm a good person. I've got good judgment. I'm not going to harm anybody. There's no law. There's no crime against asking a young woman if she'd be interested in having sex.
Not only did Myhofer say soliciting a child for sex was no crime, he claimed divine permission.
But the truth is, God wrote about me 2,000 years ago. He wrote about me in a book. He says that I can do whatever I want.
Myhofer's trial proved beyond all reasonable doubt he committed the offense, but he was found not guilty by reason of mental illness. He could still have been placed on the sex offender registry, but by state statute only if he displayed a habitual pattern or course of harmful sexual behavior. In essence, that means state lawmakers have determined in Minnesota that first offense against the child did not make him sexually dangerous. Myhofer was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, one known to have delusions of deity and sexual fantasies of children, but no criminal record that even police were aware of. While being led away after the kidnapped 7-year-old was found in his apartment earlier this month, court records show Myhofer told St. Paul police God told him to do it.
It seems to me he was absolutely a predator within our neighborhood.
AJ Legault, KARE 11 News.
Well, here's an important point that needs to be made. Studies have shown Minnesota ranks dead last in the country when it comes to the availability of mental health beds. Well, we have continuing coverage tonight on the case of a 7-year-old girl who was kidnapped and sexually assaulted in St. Paul.
Could it have been prevented? And what can be done to prevent it from happening again? Here's KARE 11's AJ Legault as he takes a look into it.
A broken mind, a history of attempted pedophilia.
Apparently you think about having sex with children? True.
And delusions of deity.
But the truth is, God wrote about me 2,000 years ago. He wrote about me in a book. He says that I can do whatever I want.
Just some of what we've learned about St. Paul kidnapping suspect Mark Myhofer's past and how that past affects the present.
So the question that we have to have as Minnesotans is, when you look at this case, what could we have done that would have prevented this from happening? And
Lisa Daly is a Minnesota native and D.C.-based attorney and policy analyst for the Treatment Advocacy Center, a nonprofit dedicated to timely and effective treatment of severe mental illness. She's been closely following the Myhofer case.
He should have been monitored much more intensely.
Daly recently met with concerned citizens in St. Paul.
Where did this situation fall through the cracks?
She points to the psychological evaluation done for Myhofer's trial in Anoka on child solicitation charges. He was not guilty because of mental illness. The doctor wrote he needed oversight of daily functioning, and if his civil commitment were terminated, he would decompensate and would be likely to present dangers to self and others.
This is exactly what happened.
It played out that way.
That's exactly how it played out. So the question that I have is, what was the treatment plan that they had in place for him? It doesn't appear that it could really have been adequate.
Myhofer's treatment plan is not public, so we don't know just what was in it. Here's what we do know. Members of the community repeatedly raised red flags about his bizarre behavior, but we're told creepiness is not a crime, and there was nothing police could do. KARE 11 has already detailed loopholes in Minnesota's sex offender registry and mental health laws that allowed Myhofer to slide under the radar. Daly says Minnesota also needs to change its treatment standards law to allow for earlier intervention.
Right now, the treatment standard is really geared towards waiting until someone has already become a threat to themselves or has actually become a threat to others in the community.
That is AJ Legault reporting. A bill that would have changed the treatment standard and allowed for earlier intervention in certain mental health cases was introduced in the legislative session that just concluded. It gained little traction, but could be reintroduced next session.
In the wake of a KARE 11 investigation, the man charged in the kidnapping and sexual assault of a young girl in St. Paul now faces charges under a new name. KARE 11's AJ Legault explains, all new tonight.
Police announced the arrest of Mark Scott Myhofer following the kidnapping and brutalization of a 7-year-old girl in St. Paul's Cathedral Hill. But as KARE 11 investigated, we found records showing Myhofer was not even his legal name. He'd changed it last year to August James Rutherford. Today, prosecutors announced they're now charging him as Rutherford, not Myhofer. Because he had no felony history, law enforcement didn't even have to be notified of the name change. But as our investigation also discovered, officially having no criminal history is very different from not having one at all.
Apparently you think about having sex with children? True.
The man now known as Rutherford is in fact a known pedophile. He'd solicited a young girl for sex in Anoka in 2011 and was only found not guilty because he was mentally ill. KARE 11's prior reports detailed the loophole in Minnesota law that kept him off the sex offender registry. So even when he was acting towards young children in a way that sparked a local school to repeatedly call the police, nothing was done until a kidnapped little girl was rescued from his room at Catholic Charities. Rutherford, a.k.a. Myhofer, appeared here in Ramsey County Court Monday afternoon to discuss his mental health evaluation. So far, doctors haven't been able to determine whether he's competent to stand trial. The judge ordered he receive additional examination at the Minnesota Security Hospital. In St. Paul, A.J. Legault, KARE 11 News.
Minnesota was just given an F for the public's ability to access information.
It's that failure that may have played a role in a crime that horrified a St. Paul community. KARE 11's A.J. Legault investigates.
And look how it ended up. Look how it ended up.
Marcy Wallace is not usually an angry woman.
Absolutely not.
A semi-retired attorney, Marcy now devotes much of her time as editor of the Ramsey Hill neighborhood newsletter.
We love this neighborhood.
But a crime in the neighborhood she's called home since 1981 has left her furious that Minnesota hid critical information from the public about a man whose suspicious behavior had been making neighbors uneasy for months.
I wanted to find that. It should have been there, but it was not.
What's not there in the state's online criminal courts database is records showing the man charged with kidnapping and sexually assaulting a 7-year-old girl in Marcy's beloved neighborhood had committed a previous sex offense against a child.
And I was bewildered that that information was not in the public database where I believed it should be.
In 2011, August James Rutherford, who at the time went by the name Mark Myhofer, solicited a young girl for sex in Anoka. He admitted to the police he was a pedophile.
Apparently you think about having sex with children? True.
His trial proved beyond all reasonable doubt he committed the offense, but he was found not guilty by reason of mental illness.
No one is acquitted by reason of mental illness unless they have committed the crime.
But when the paranoid schizophrenic began acting so bizarre towards children in St. Paul that police were repeatedly called, records show officers told neighbors he had no criminal history. Marcy says she fact-checked that on the online court's database.
I'm searching for Mark Myhofer.
And found nothing but minor infractions.
We know all about his parking violations, but we don't know that he offered a little girl $10,000 to have sex with him.
In Minnesota, charges that don't end in convictions and even current pending cases can only be found if you come down to the courthouse, find a place to park, take your belt and your watch off, go inside, go through security, get on the elevator, find the right floor, the right room, where there's a public access computer terminal that may or may not be available, just to search for the case.
And I don't understand why.
Neither does KARE 11. So we recently asked the question to attorney Julia Schmidoff-Latz, who sits on the Supreme Court Advisory Committee that oversees access to criminal court records.
Isn't that information that a consumer should be able to get?
If they're convicted, yes.
But if they're not convicted, she argues people can find time during regular business hours to go to the courthouse to search for the information.
The transparency exists. The transparency is there. It truly is a question of convenience.
Marcy contends Minnesota now needs to face an inconvenient truth that making public records hard to find kept the public from finding out about the danger living next door until it was too late.
Why make it hard for us to get? And look what happened after it was made hard to get. Look what happened.
Rutherford, a.k.a. Myhofer, will be in court on Monday for a hearing to determine if he's competent to stand trial. A.J. Legault, KARE 11 News.
Today, the suspect in the kidnapping and sexual assault of a 7-year-old girl is found incompetent to stand trial. Investigative reporter A.J. Legault has been following the case and has the latest from court.
The hearing here in St. Paul lasted just minutes, but for the family of the little girl kidnapped off the street in Ramsey Hill back in May, today's ruling means there is no closure on the horizon. August James Rutherford, also known as Mark Myhofer, has been undergoing psychiatric evaluation at the Minnesota Security Hospital since May 5th, when he was arrested after a kidnapped girl was found inside his Catholic Charities apartment, bound with duct tape. The prosecutor told the court today that doctors found Rutherford, who has a previous diagnosis as a paranoid schizophrenic, incompetent to stand trial. The judge ordered he remain in custody and referred his case to civil commitment court. KARE 11's prior investigation of the Rutherford case exposed legal loopholes and system failures that allowed the known pedophile, who believed God has given him permission to have sex with kids, to be free in the community with no notice given to neighbors of the danger he could represent.
The order of Rutherford's case to civil commitment court means he will receive medical treatment, with the ultimate goal being to restore him to competency to stand trial on the criminal charges. In St. Paul, AJ Legault, KARE 11 News.